Well, we've been looking at Australopithecine, whether or not it's an ape man, or it's an ape, or it's a human. Dr. Don Patton says, Australopithecus is represented in this manner in Time Life's book, The Missing Link. This ill-clad creature is the star of the show and would gain first notoriety through the efforts of Richard Leakey in Africa and made widely known by National Geographic, where he found the Nutcracker Man. Another famous finder of Australopithecine material is Donald Johanson. He found Lucy. What is not mentioned in his book about Lucy is the fact that the bottom portion of the skeleton fossil, the knee and the leg bone, which is what defines her as the ancestor of humans, was not found with the rest of the skeleton. That knee bone and leg bone was found some 3 miles away, and according to Johansen, some 50 meters lower in strata, many thousands, millions of years older. But he put them together, and so you've got some ape bones connected with knee bones and leg bones, really small, but which were supposed to be human. They're supposed to have walked upright. Difficulty here. Many would deny all of the implications of that. Many would say that Lucy is much more like the pygmy chimpanzee today, which does walk somewhat upright, but certainly not human-like. What is left out of most of the Australopithecine material, especially regarding the Leakey's efforts, is that they don't think at all, and never did think, and that this led to man or has anything to do with man. Notice the point that is acknowledged by Lewin, the editor of Research News in Science magazine. He says, Richard and his parents, Louis and Mary Leakey, have held to a view of human origins for nearly half a century now, that the line of true man, the line of Homo large-brained tool-making and so on, is a separate ancestry that goes back millions and millions of years. And the ape man, Australopithecus, has nothing to do with human ancestry. So after all these years, throws it all out. Now you don't find that in your biology textbooks or earth science or anthropology textbooks in undergraduate work. There are many other authorities who agree with Lewin, saying that this star of the show, Australopithecus, had nothing to do with the lineage of man, even though they are devout evolutionists. Charles Oxnard is no lightweight in the field of anthropology. He is dean of the graduate school and professor of biology and anatomy at the University of Southern California. He's writing The American Biology Teacher, that's a magazine, when he says conventional wisdom, and that's what reported in the textbooks, is that Australopithecine fragments are generally rather similar to humans. The new studies, however, point to different conclusions. Now, the new studies, Dr. Patton says, he calls multivariate analysis. He ridicules the idea of most of those who've studied the fossil material of ancient man. They pick it up, he says, and they look at it and fly by the seat of their britches, he says, and say, this looks like that, or it looks like this. And they presume that it belongs to this lineage or that one. He said, the preconceptions shape those ideas and determine what they see. He goes at it much more scientifically with his multivariate analysis. He makes as many as 1,000 measurements of the same bone, comparing the measurements of the same place on other bones. Then he runs it through the computer and is able to say definitively, quantitatively, just how similar it is and how dissimilar it is. And referring to this kind of study, he says, the new investigations suggest that the fossil fragments are usually uniquely different from any living form. When they do have similarities with living species, they're as often as not reminiscent of the orangutan. These results imply that the various Australopithecines are really not all that much like humans. Many have been They may well have been bipeds, but if so, it was not in the human manner. They may also have been quite capable climbers, as much at home in the trees as on the ground. So he kind of throws it out the window after all these years. Charles Oxnard, Dean of Graduate School, Professor of Biology, Anatomy, USC, the American biology teacher. Others agree with Oxnard life, like Lord Solly Zuckerman, who is perhaps the leading anthropologist in Europe. This is Dr. Patton talking. In his book, Beyond the Ivory Tower, he makes a very strong statement. He says, the Australopithecine skull is in fact so overwhelmingly simian, as opposed to human, that the contrary proposition could be equated to an assertion that black is white. That is a very strong statement by one of the leading authorities in the world that says that the Australopithecine skull is much more like the ape than like the human, and you just can't say otherwise. He points out, well, yes, they were somewhat upright, but upright like modern apes. They were knuckle walkers, and he proves it through his studies. When we look at the various apes that are alive today, we find that some have teeth just like the Australopithecine fossil. For example, the baboon in Ethiopia, which is 100% ape. It's a seed eater, and it has a parabolic shape rather than the U-shaped dental arcade. It doesn't like the large canine teeth. It doesn't have the large canine teeth. It has teeth almost exactly like the Australopithecine, and it is an ape, 100%. And so that doesn't prove that Australopithecine is in the lineage of man any more than it proves that these baboons are. We can sum up the evidence for Australopithecus this way. He had a brain size that was the size of an ape, about 400 to 700 cc compared to 1,400 to over 2,000 for modern man. So the brain size was the size of an ape. He looked like an ape. His face was large compared to the small brain case. He walked like apes today, a knuckle walker, according to the multivariate analysis. And he had teeth like the baboon of Ethiopia, which is 100% ape. So he was an ape that has now become extinct. Dr. Patton says, Dr. Leakey's bases his reputation of Darwin, Dr. Leakey bases his repudiation of Darwin on the results of his long search in East Africa for the remains of the original man. The generally accepted post-Darwin view was that man developed from the baboon 3 to 5 million years ago. But Leakey has found no evidence of a spurt in development at that time. Chicago American. His Lordship, Lord Solly Zuckerman's scorn for the level of competence he sees displayed by paleoanthropologists is legendary. It is exceeded only by the force of his dismissal of the Australopithecines as having anything to do with human evolution. They are just bloody apes, he says. He is reputed to have observed, on examining the Australopithecine remains in South Africa, Zuckerman had become extremely powerful in British science, being an advisor to the government up to the highest level. While at Oxford and then Birmingham universities, he had vigorously pursued a metrical and statistical approach to studying the anatomy of fossil humanids. It was on this basis that he underpinned his lifelong rejection of the Australopithecines as human ancestors. Roger Lewin quotes this in Bones of Contention. Zielman compares the pygmy chimpanzee to Lucy, one of the oldest hominid fossils known, and finds the similarities striking. They are almost identical in body size, in stature, and in brain size. These commonalities, Zielman argues, indeed, that pygmy chimps use their limbs in much the same way Lucy did. We have Sidrian Zildman. The Australopithecines are rapidly shrinking back to the status of peculiarly specialized apes. We have Matt Cartmel, Duke. David Pilbeam, Harvard. Glenn Isaac, Harvard, American scientists. All have that same point of view. Now we got Ramapithecus is completely ape as well. Not primate, not human. Dr. Patton says, consider the statement made by Robert B. Eckert of Penn State University. He was the one who first nominated Ramapithecus as the ancestor of man. Everybody seems to have their favorite. The first in the rung leading to man. He and his cousins, Australopithecus, Limapithecus, and Kenyapithecus, the Miocene apes, have now been demoted, as he acknowledged in Scientific American. They demoted somebody else's work and promote their own. I guess the wallet has something to do with it. There would appear to be little evidence to suggest that several different hominid species are represented among the old world Dryopithecine fossils. In other words, they're all one species. Ramapithecus, Australopithecus, sounds like an Oreo cookie, Limapithecus, Kenyapithecus, they themselves nevertheless seem to have been apes, morphologically, ecologically, and behaviorally. In other words, their shape, this area where they live, what they did, the way they behave, all of this is just like apes. That's what they are. Likewise, Roger Lewin sums up the situation today regarding these Miocene apes. He says, the dethroning of Ramapithecus from putative first human in 1961 to extinct relative of the orangutan in 1982 is one of the most fascinating and bitter sagas of the search for human origins. Everybody has their own hero. They throw everybody else's stuff out. So we eliminate the bottom rung of the evolutionist's proposed ladder of the descendants of modern man. Now we have some things that are falsified discoveries which expose human evolutionists as devious. The Piltdown Man hoax. Theodore H.F. states in the booklet, True Science Agrees with Scripture, published by the Good News Broadcasting Association. The discovery of the Piltdown Man and the reconstruction that followed involved a bit of mystery. Mr. Charles Darwin, who was credited with the find, did not make his information public until 1912. Apparently, he claimed to have picked up the fragments of bone in 1909 or 1910 in a gravel pit and some others in 1911. He took the bones to Dr. A. Smith Woodward of the British Museum. They employed some laborers to sift carefully the gravel in the gravel pit. The efforts yielded a piece of jawbone, another sliver of bone from a skull, and a canine tooth. These fragments were so small that a sleight of hand artist could have concealed them in the palm of one hand. Nevertheless, it was from this that the scientists reconstructed the Piltdown Man and told the world that a new genus had been found. Every effort was exerted to make a reconstruction along ape lines. For example, the skull was carefully made with a brain pan capacity of 1070 cc. This was midway between the capacity of an ape skull, which is 600 cc, and a human skull, which Woodward and Dawson decided would be approximately 1500 cc. The first exposure came when Professor Arthur Keith, curator of the Museum of the Royal College of Surgeons, London, demonstrated that the Piltdown skull capacity had been severely underrated. He showed it was closer to 1500 cc. Professor Keynes was a believer in evolution, but he wanted facts, not misrepresentations. So the reconstructors had also done something with the placing of the teeth that did not pass scientific investigation. They put the one canine tooth on the right side of the lower jaw and at an angle to conform to that of an ape's tooth. In 2 successive years, 1914 and 15, 2 American professors pointed out that the lower canine was not a lower tooth at all, neither was it a right tooth, but a left and upper tooth. Before this, however, I guess they weren't dentists. Before this, however, in 1913, Professor Garrett S. Miller of the United States National Museum objected to the classing together of the jaw, teeth, and cranium. The professor, who was well versed in this subject and had a goodly supply of anthropoid and human bones for comparison, said the jaw and tooth belonged to a fossil chimpanzee. So remember, these disclosures all took place within 3 to 4 years of the discovery of the Piltdown Man. Yet scientists paraded this reconstructed host for before children and adults alike for